So for people that haven't seen the Resilience Reef before, that's because it is a brand new show. It is a super brand new show. Shereen is my first guest on this show. I have done other shows, but this show is a brand new show. And on this show, we're going to be talking about resilience stories and strategies for managing chronic health conditions. It's something very close to my heart, something I've been dealing with for some time, and it's certainly something that Shereen has had to deal with in her life. And so on the show today, she's going to talk about how she dealt with, in terms of strategies and stories of resilience, she's going to talk about how she had to deal with chronic anxiety and burnout. And how that led to some crazy things like injury and illness that she had to deal with and cope with. So we'll talk a little bit about what the problem was and how she experienced that, and also sharing some of those important resilience strategies to help folk like you who may be dealing with something similar to what Shereen had to go through. So Shereen, tell us where you are today.
Yeah, today I'm in my home office, which is the first bit that I love to say. I'm based in Brisbane and Queensland. Because I work for myself and I do things in my own way now. Yeah.
That's the way to do. That's the way to be.
I'm loving doing this. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so talking about anxiety and burnout, it's not necessarily something that everybody is familiar with. There's a lot of it around, we know, but it's kind of, tell us a little bit about how you first, what were the first signs and signals or symptoms for you that helped you to recognize that things weren't quite right?
Yeah, absolutely. So anxiety was definitely the first part of my journey, and probably was around for a long time before I realized it was actually a problem. So we tend to put up with things, I find, a lot until they become so pervasive, so problematic in our life that we can't ignore them anymore. And the first warning sign for me with my anxiety was I paid for a week-long music festival camping trip. And I had to call, I was 17 at the time, had to call my dad on day 2, crying, saying, pick me up, I can't cope anymore. And I went, oh, something's not so good here. And I still had no idea what it was. I just felt too big of feelings to handle in that situation. Mm-hmm. And it actually probably took me 3 or 4 years before I realized, hey, these feelings are around a lot and they're actually getting in the way of things day to day. So I started to wake up feeling like worried what was happening for the day. I found I was limiting myself in doing things because I was feeling anxious. So for me, that was often feeling on edge, like my stomach was in a knot. I would just get like this wheel of thoughts in certain situations where I just couldn't get out of this pattern of negative thinking. And what's really tricky about anxiety, I find, is it presents differently for a lot of people. So this is how mine presented. And some people might be sitting here going, I think I have anxiety, but it's not quite like that. It still can be. It's really a future-based fear, and it becomes chronic or problematic when it's happening a lot and it's getting in the way of our living our lives. So we often all feel anxious a little bit about things. There's been a lot of that around the last few years. But it's when it's becoming problematic on a regular basis that I think we need to go, hey, something that's not quite right and I should be doing to improve things for myself.
Well, what
That's
kind of
with
things?
anxiety. Did you respond to talking about burnout or?
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking just stuff off on that, because there's what kind of, can you give people a few examples on what kind of things did it get in the way of? Like what did it prevent you from doing or saying or thinking? Have you got certain examples? Can you remember either from being 17? I know that's a short while ago for you, but maybe there are some examples that you can share where people can kind of latch onto that and think, that I'm getting a sign that something, I'm doing that behavior and it's making me feel like that,
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember things all too well, because it was especially anxiety attacks pervasive for me. It stopped me from doing anything else, really. So that big stuff for me, my particular triggers, I find we often all have things that trigger if we have anxiety. So certain situations will heighten it for us. So mine was travel or being away at night, separated from my family at night. Even so, if my family were to go away, or I tried to go away on a weekend with friends or something like that, or camping trip, I would be in a state where I could not chill, I could not rest, I couldn't think about anything other than being worried about what's going on. And there was actually no logic to the thinking that I was experiencing in these times. And as a really logical, really intelligent, educated person, that's part of what drove my anxiety, was the fact that it actually made no logic. I would go crazy about that. And particularly the logical part of my brain in those moments would know that it was ridiculous, but it doesn't mean I could stop it. And that was really challenging. And on a day-to-day level,
carry on.
Day it was really, I could get around with doing I could get by and do stuff, but I just had this undercurrent of dis-ease and panic to most of my day. I'd wake up and want to go, oh, what's today going to bring about? What should I be on edge for? And it's kind of like you're always on high alert is what mine was like. I think whenever we're in a heightened state because there's something unusual going on, that was my everyday, which I only realised now that my everyday isn't like that, how exhausting that was.
Absolutely. And in terms of, that went on for a long while, in terms of you feeling that way and not really understanding, I know I shouldn't feel this way, but my body's telling me I should feel this way for some reason or another. And it's kind of not making sense. Tell us about what point it reached then to get you to that stage where you felt, my goodness, I'm so exhausted. I can't do much anymore with this. What am I going to do?
Yeah. There was probably levels to it, so stages. So I fairly early on got some help because I was to a point where I went in the way of things. It's out, just from enjoying, from moving out home, sorts of things. So at that point, I got to a certain point where I could, what I call, manage my anxiety. So day to day, I was coping really well. I had some strategies. It had still come up and I wouldn't know what to do with it always in really big circumstances. But I kind of muddled through because I had some crutches and some really useful strategies. And so I coped for many, many years. And it was only though then when the rest of my health fell apart as a subsequent result that I looked deeper inside and I actually have formed quite a different and useful relationship with my anxiety now. So that would be in the last couple of years, I think, formed that new level. Yeah.
What kind of things, Shereen, did you use to, what strategies did you use to cope in those times where it was okay? You were managing to deal with it well?
Yeah. So definitely I got some help. So I was way too close to it to understand things properly. So I did get some professional help, like what I do with it now. And that was but I learned that it's okay to have some anxiety. I wanted to get rid of all of it. But anxiety actually has a really useful place, just not in the level that I had it. So I kind of made friends a little bit with it. And it started, as silly as it might sound, I used to talk to it. I go, hey, thanks. Yeah, I really need you. Like, so you can kind of rest now. And I'd almost like talk my anxiety down and say, I've got this. You can have a break in this situation. So that was one part of it. The other big strategy I used was I slowly built a bank of positive evidence for my mind. So when we get anxious, it's telling us the worst case scenario. This is going to go wrong. This is going to go wrong. Look how that was bad last time. Well, this time's going to be like that. Those sort of stories. Instead, I start to gently push myself to try things and really focus on when they went, hey, I managed that and I was fine, wasn't I? You know, I started to take a day overnight, just local, in case it all fell apart. And then I could go next time, hey, you were fine when you went away. And the other big thing was I shared it with people.
Great.
So I wasn't embarrassed about the fact that I was anxious, but really what we need most is support and connection. So when I started to openly share, hey, I feel anxious sometimes when this happens, do you help me out and support me? People understand what's going on and were able to be there for me more to help me through things, which was a big help for me as well. And that's got easier. 15 years ago, there's no talking this about any of it at all, but now it's really easy. And I love being able to guide other people through my experience like this.
Yeah, because it is difficult to talk about something that you're dealing with, but you don't quite understand yourself. Why are you feeling this way, or why are you thinking this? For fear of all kinds of things, which I'm sure some of those things went through your mind in terms of what will people think about me? Will they think I'm going crazy? Will they think I'm going mad? And I'm not coping. I should be coping. There's a lot of shoulds and musts that we say to ourselves, isn't there? We should do this or we should do that. And it's difficult when we're not to share that with people because of how we feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yours got to a point though where it took you way further than probably you expected. It took you to a point where you were starting to get quite ill from it. So although you were kind of coping, you'd seen someone, you got help, and you were befriending it and putting it in its place from time to time. At what point did you get ill through it? What? And tell us about that.
Yeah, I think I was diagnosed about 8 years ago now. So I'm sure I was sick for sort of been knowingly dealing with that probably 17 years now. So it's sort of halfway in that journey. But obviously for quite some time, my body had been taking the toll of my emotional and mental burdens. So I thoroughly believe that when we don't deal well with our mental state, then manifests quickly because it has nowhere else to go. And it's also trying to, so if we keep ignoring it, like thoroughly enough, needed, it then manifests physically. So for me, all that stress of being anxious so much really affected my adrenal health. So my cortisol levels, all of that sort of stuff. And then as a result, before I really knew it, I suddenly just went, why do I just feel so crap all the time, so tired and so on? And eventually I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease, which is a thyroid autoimmune condition, which I believe a combination of my gut really not coping with life and my adrenals not coping with the emotional load led to this, which there's some science to back that, and some of it is I just know my body and my journey that that's some of what it was. And so I developed, that started the whole stage of my journey with dealing with that, the relationship I developed with that disease, and then the fact that I just kind of tried to ignore it for a long time and hope it would fix itself, which is where the burnout part came in. When you push yourself super hard with an autoimmune disease, you sometimes burn out, I learned. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you're still going through the effects of having, your autoimmune condition. Are you? Is it still prevalent, or is it kind of? Are you in remission with that?
No, it's still prevalent. So I still take meds every day. I'm still balancing the things to be symptom. I'm definitely a lot better than I was when I reflect back even 3 or 4 years ago. So my numbers on paper are looking better. Mostly I don't feel so symptomatic anymore. Fatigue and brain fog were my major symptoms. It happened definitely far less often now, which is fantastic. Yeah.
That's good. So, combination of all the skills and strategies you have and have built over the years to manage the anxiety and the burnout are working well in terms of either in the background, subconsciously or consciously, to help you through the next stage, which is dealing with the effects and consequences of, having such, long-term fatigue and stress applied to your body, and your body having to deal with that, are helping you to now deal with managing the autoimmune condition, if you like, because you're looking superbly well, I have to say. You're sounding superbly well, and it sounds like you're on top of things. It sounds like you've got it.
Look, I have to be perfectly honest. Some days are better than others, as with all of us. And for all that I know and all that I still have days where I'm really rubbish at managing myself. In particular, my struggle is I know what makes me feel better, and some days I still do the things just me. So I'm still very human in that regard. But I have to say the biggest thing I think that helped move the dial forward on healing my autoimmune was when I work with people at an unconscious mind level. So we really dig deep to the stuff at that core level. And it's when I did that to understand for myself, why was I sick and why was I hanging on sick? So there was for me a story and a belief that I'd made about needing to be ill. And we looked at the history and up states over the years because I needed to be ill or injured in some way. I've got to be anxious. I've got to have adrenal problems. I've got to have gut problems. I've got to get an autoimmune disease. We talked briefly about it in the show notes. I had a brain injury at some point because that was the belief that would keep me safe and loved in some way, to not go into it in too much depth. Yeah, but it's when I understood that and I was able to separate from that belief and that story, that's been the key to starting to heal properly for me.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. So it's certainly very personal but helpful, because it's a great strategy for people to look for in their own world and think, well, for what purpose? What purpose is this thing here? What is it? What's it doing here? Why do I need this in my life? Is it something I can do something with and about and use it to my advantage in some ways? But certainly I'm with you on that in terms of autoimmune conditions. We may look from the outside incredibly well and healthy and feeling great, but it's not all a bed of roses. I know that for sure. So I'm really glad you joined us today, Shereen, because it's been a learning for everyone, I think, in terms of recognizing the signs, the early signs potentially of a problem, which needn't go on for necessarily a long time. If you can start to do something, use some of those strategies of resilience that we can learn quite early on and take from other parts of our life. Actually, I'm sure that's something you've done, is to take other things from other parts of your life and think, how could, and maybe not necessarily consciously, but applying it to later situations, current situations, where kind of don't sometimes know where you've got this from, where you've got this kind of strength from, but from somewhere it's come to help in some way. So it's great that you were able to join us today and share your story. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I love to share, and the other flip side of why I got this is so that I can demonstrate to other people over illnesses, how to deal with things a whole lot quicker and easier than me. So it doesn't have to go on as long as my journey has. And that's why I hope sharing my story helps educate people to help themselves sooner. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. I share it whenever I can.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I hope you have a great day. You've got a lot of the day left, certainly where you are. And we'll talk again soon. We're going to be sharing some strategies in a month or two time, aren't we? You're going to come back and share some strategies to help people from your work as a coach, as a stress and anxiety management coach. So I look forward to seeing you again on the show.